The year was 1871, and the plains of Ash Hollow stretched out like an ocean of dust and gold. Wind howled through the bones of forgotten towns, whistling across hollow windows and through the broken ribs of barns long surrendered to time. On that morning, the horizon shimmered under a pitiless sun, and a lone rider carved his path through the haze, a man whose shadow carried more stories than the scars on his skin. Calder Hayes rode with the ease of someone who no longer feared dying. The reins sat loose in his calloused hands, his revolver low on his hip, the brim of his hat shading eyes that had seen too much and forgotten too little. Each step of his horse kicked up small ghosts of the men who tried to kill him before. He'd fought in wars that no one remembered, chased bounties that paid in guilt more than gold, and left behind names that weren't worth repeating. Ash Hollow was supposed to be a quiet stop, one night's rest, maybe a whiskey, then on to the next job. But towns like these had a way of stirring old trouble like dust in the wind. He could feel it even before he saw the sign swinging over the saloon door, creaking like a coffin hinge. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco and tension. Men leaned against the bar, hands too close to their holsters. The barkeep's eyes tracked every movement like a preacher watching sinners. Calder ordered a drink and kept his back to the wall. Didn't think the devil drank whiskey, a voice muttered from down the bar. Calder didn't answer. He took a slow sip, feeling the burn crawl down his throat. He'd learned long ago that silence could cut deeper than words. But the man, a broad-shouldered ranch hand with a scar like a lightning bolt across his cheek, took that silence for weakness. He stood, hand twitching near his belt. Then came the sound every man in the West recognized, the hard click of a hammer being drawn back. "Sit down," Calder said. His voice was low, steady. No threat, just a fact. The man hesitated. Then he smiled. "Name's Price," he said. "Heard you been running from that poster outside." Calder turned. "You talk too much, Price." The gunfight was over before it began. 3 men drew. 2 hit the ground. The third fired wide, panic shot too high. Calder moved like a shadow through smoke, each motion measured clean. The barkeep ducked behind the counter. Glass shattered. Silence followed. Calder holstered his weapon. His whiskey still sat untouched on the counter, rippling from the echoes of violence. When he stepped outside, the town had gone still. Dust drifted through sunlight, carrying the smell of gunpowder. Somewhere a horse snorted nervously. He thought that was the end of it, just another day, another grave. But then a voice came from under the cottonwood tree across the street. "You call that justice?" The word stopped him cold. She stood with her arms crossed, half in shadow, tall, flame-haired, wearing a faded plaid shirt that hung loose around her frame, boots caked in dust. Her face wasn't soft, nor her stare forgiving. She looked at him like she'd seen through every lie he'd ever told. Calder adjusted his hat, said nothing. "You shot 3 men," she continued, stepping closer. "One of them still breathing. Or was. You could have walked away." "Didn't see much choice," he replied. "There's always a choice," she said. The wind caught her hair, lifting it in the fading light. For a moment, the silence between them was heavier than the gun's smoke. Calder met her eyes, and something unfamiliar stirred in his chest, something sharp and unsteady. He turned away first. "What's your name?" she called after him. He paused. "Calder Hayes." She nodded once. "Then I hope you ride better than you aim, Mr. Hayes." He didn't look back, but her voice lingered like the echo of a church bell. That night, the saloon lights burned low as whispers spread through town. Whispers about Jonas Pike, the cattle baron who owned half the valley, and the bounty he'd posted on anyone who crossed him. Calder wasn't a man who cared for other people's wars, but when Pike's messenger came knocking, the sound of gold hitting the table spoke louder than reason. $500 to keep Pike's land safe from raiders, the man said. "Cheyenne mostly. You keep them off, you keep the money." Calder looked at the coins. 500 could buy a new horse, a year's worth of bullets, maybe a piece of quiet. But something about it stank. He'd heard of Pike before, a man who called himself a rancher but acted like a king. Still, gold was gold. "I'll take the job," Calder said. The messenger grinned. "Knew you would." He didn't mention Evelyn Hart. It wasn't until dawn that Calder learned the woman under the tree was Pike's neighbor. and the only one in Ash Hollow who'd ever stood against him. She'd inherited her father's ranch after the war, and Pike had wanted it ever since. When she refused to sell, his men burned her fences, ran off her cattle, poisoned her well. She'd fought back alone, and somehow she'd survived. Calder rode out to the edge of her land that morning, more out of curiosity than duty. The sun was high, painting everything in golden shadow. Evelyn was there again, mending a fence, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She didn't look up until his horse's shadow fell over her. "You came to apologize?" she asked. "No," he said. "Came to say I'm working for Pike." Her hands stilled. "Then I'll save you the trouble. Don't bother crossing my land. You think you can stand against him?" "I already have." She looked him dead in the eye, and for the first time in years, Calder found no words. There was no fear in her, no hesitation. Just conviction, a kind he'd forgotten existed. He turned his horse, meaning to leave, but something about her stopped him again. She wasn't just another stubborn rancher. She was a reminder of everything the war had taken: honor, mercy, the belief that some fights were worth losing. By evening, he was camped near the river, the sound of crickets rising with the dusk. He sharpened his knife, watching sparks leap into the dark. His reflection stared back from the blade, older than he remembered. He'd fought every kind of battle a man could fight, against men, hunger, even God. But as the fire crackled low and the wind carried her words back to him, he felt the first tremor of a fight he didn't understand. The kind you couldn't win with a gun. He looked toward the distant ranch where her lantern flickered against the night, a single flame holding its ground against the dark. For the first time in years, Calder Hayes wondered if he'd finally met his match. And in the silence that followed, the plains seemed to whisper the truth he wasn't ready to hear. He'd fought every battle that mattered, except the one in her eyes. The sun rose over Ash Hollow like a bloodied coin, spilling light over a world still half asleep and half afraid. Calder Hayes rode out early, the smell of smoke already hanging on the wind. He'd been tracking the line between Pike's ranch and the open prairie when he saw it, columns of ash curling into the sky, black against the pale dawn. His horse tensed beneath him, hooves crunching over scorched earth. The air was heavy, wrong. When he reached the ruins of the Hart Ranch, the world fell silent. The barn was gone, reduced to a skeleton of smoldering beams. The corral lay open, horses scattered. A child's doll sat blackened near the well, its porcelain face split clean down the middle. Calder swung off his horse, boots sinking into the charred soil. He knelt, touching the earth still warm from fire. This wasn't an accident. It was a message. Behind him came the thunder of hooves. He turned, hand on his revolver, only to see Evelyn Hart riding hard through the smoke, her hair wild, her face streaked with dirt. She reined in beside him, chest heaving, eyes like molten iron. "You did this," she said, her voice breaking under the weight of fury. "No," he replied, steady but low. "This wasn't me. You work for the man who sent them." He didn't argue. Couldn't. The truth was as plain as the ruin around them. Evelyn slid off her horse, fists trembling. "They said they came for cattle thieves." "That's what Pike told you, isn't it? Thieves." Calder's jaw tightened. He remembered Pike's smirk, the easy lies wrapped in gold. "I didn't know," he said. "Then now you do." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of burned cedar. Calder watched her walk among the ashes, watched her kneel beside what had once been her home. Something inside him, something long buried under years of killing and wandering, started to crack. He wanted to say something, anything, but there were no words worth saying. When she finally looked back at him, her face was pale, but steady. "You can't fix this with bullets," she said, "but you can make it mean something." That night, the two of them rode out under a sky bruised with clouds. Evelyn led the way, her horse sure-footed along narrow ridges that cut through Pike's land. She didn't speak much, and Calder didn't press her. He knew better than to disturb a woman carrying that kind of fire. They made camp near the dry creek crossing. The river below shimmered with moonlight, slow and silver. Calder gathered wood while Evelyn sat by the embers, her hands still shaking. "He'll come for me next," she said quietly. "Pike." She nodded. He doesn't like leaving things unfinished. Calder sat across from her, the firelight catching the edge of a scar. Then, you'll need someone who can finish things. Her eyes lifted, skeptical. You offering? I'm trying to make this right. She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. You can't make right what's already turned to ash. He didn't answer. Instead, he tossed another branch into the fire, watching the sparks rise into the night. The silence between them was heavy, but alive, shaped by unspoken truths neither was ready to name. By dawn, they were back in the saddle. They followed the old trade route that cut through the canyon. If Pike's men were setting traps, they'd find them there. The sun burned low through the dust, turning the world the color of old whiskey. Midway through the canyon, the ambush came, a rifle cracked, echoing off the stone walls. Calder's horse reared, nearly throwing him. Another shot. A scream of metal as a bullet split his saddle strap. Evelyn ducked behind a rock, drawing the small pistol from her belt. 3 of them, Calder shouted, up on the ridge. He fired twice, sending dust and echoes flying. Evelyn took aim, her hands surprisingly steady. The 3rd gunman fell, his body tumbling down the slope like a broken doll. Then silence. Just the wind whistling through the canyon and the rush of water below. Calder climbed the ridge, checking the fallen men. Pike's insignia burned into the leather of their belts. It confirmed what they both already knew. Pike's starting a war, Calder said. Evelyn joined him, her jaw set. Then we end it before it swallows the rest of us. The next days blurred into one long stretch of dust and danger. They crossed rivers swollen with spring melt, hid from riders under rocky overhangs, shared bread too stale to chew, and stories too painful to tell. Evelyn spoke of her father, how Pike had once been his friend before greed made him cruel. Calder told her of the war, how he buried his brother in a field of mud and never looked back. One night, rain came hard, washing the dust from their faces. Evelyn sat close to the fire, humming a tune so soft it almost broke his heart. Calder patched a tear in her coat, pretending not to notice her watching him. You ever think about stopping? She asked. Stopping what? The fighting. The running. He thought about it. Then he said, every damn day. When the storm passed, they reached the valley where Watkins' people camped. The Cheyenne had been blamed for every raid in Pike's ledgers, but the truth lay far different. As they approached, warriors stepped from the shadows, bows drawn. Evelyn raised her hands. We came to talk, she said. A man stepped forward, tall, with eyes dark as riverstone. Wakan. He looked from Evelyn to Calder, and something unreadable passed between them. Talk fast, he said. Your kind doesn't stay long without blood. Calder spoke first. Pike's been using your name. Burning farms, killing families, blaming you to stir war. Watkins' gaze hardened. You expect me to believe the white man's mercy? No, Calder said. I expect you to believe his greed. There was silence. Then Evelyn stepped forward, offering her father's old silver badge, a token of peace. We don't want his war, she said. We just want to end it. Watkins studied her. Then, with a slow nod, he said, Tomorrow we meet. You will see for yourself what Pike has done. But they never made it to morning. Just before dawn, Pike's men stormed the camp. Gunfire tore through the stillness, flames licking the edges of tents. Calder grabbed Evelyn, dragging her behind cover as bullets shredded the earth. He saw Pike himself in the chaos, shouting orders, his face twisted with rage. Evelyn turned to Calder, realization dawning. He used us, she said. He wanted this war. Calder's stomach twisted. Everything, the gold, the job, the lies, it had all been a setup. Pike had wanted witnesses to his own betrayal. They ran, cutting through the chaos, dodging horses and smoke. Calder fought his way toward the ridge, his revolver hot in his hand. A blow caught his shoulder. He stumbled but kept moving. Behind him, Evelyn fired, each shot measured and sure. At the edge of the ravine, they were surrounded. Pike's men closed in, guns raised. Calder's eyes darted for a way out, but there was none. Pike stepped forward, grinning through the smoke. You should have stuck to killing strangers, Hayes, he said. Love makes men stupid. Evelyn spat at his boots. "You'll burn for this." "Maybe," Pike said, "but not today." The butt of a rifle struck Calder's temple, and the world went black. When he woke, the sky was bleeding with dawn. His wrists were bound, his head pounding. Evelyn sat beside him, also tied, her face pale, but unbroken. "Still breathing," she whispered. "For now," he said. She smiled faintly. "Then it's not over yet." Calder turned his head toward the horizon, where Pike's campfires burned against the coming light. Somewhere deep inside, something cold and certain settled in him. No, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Dawn came like a wound reopening, pale and raw against the blackened hills. The air still carried the tang of gunpowder and something colder, fear maybe, or the hollow after battle. Eli Carson stood by the dying embers of their campfire, hands trembling as he reloaded his revolver. Across the clearing, Nora was awake, watching him through the thin veil of smoke. Her eyes were distant, unreadable, but there was a stiffness in her shoulders that spoke louder than words. She hadn't forgiven him, not for what he'd done at Red Hollow, not for what he hadn't done when she begged him to turn back. He met her gaze, and for a heartbeat, the silence between them felt heavier than the land itself. "We ride at first light," he said, his voice raw. "If they're tracking us, we'll need to cross the river before noon." She didn't move. And after, he looked toward the ridge where the sun clawed its way through the haze. "We find Carson's Bluff. The land's still mine. Still worth fighting for." Her expression hardened. "Still fighting, Eli. Always fighting." He turned away, cinching the saddle. "It's all I've ever known." The horses snorted, uneasy in the morning chill. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed, a sound sharp enough to slice through the brittle quiet. They mounted without another word. The trail wound through canyons scorched by drought, past the bones of old homesteads swallowed by dust. Every mile seemed to whisper the same thing, that the frontier didn't forgive, it just endured. By midday, they reached the river. It ran low and angry, swollen with the meltwater of spring. Eli dismounted and stepped into the shallows, testing the current. It bit at his boots, cold as judgment. "We'll lead the horses across," he said. One wrong step and... The crack of a rifle cut him off. A bullet splintered the rock inches from his hand. Another whined past Nora's head. She ducked, dragging her horse behind the bank. Eli dropped low, scanning the opposite ridge. Dust plumed near the cottonwoods, 3 riders, maybe 4, shadows against the glare. "Bandits," she hissed. "Not bandits." His voice was steel now. "Russell's men." Her breath hitched. "You said you left them behind." "I thought I did." The gunfire grew steady. Chips of shale burst around them as bullets bit into the bank. Eli fired back twice, then again, his aim calm and cold. One figure tumbled from the ridge, the rest scattering. The noise faded, but the danger didn't. He knew they weren't done. When the echo of the last shot died, Nora's voice trembled. "They'll keep coming." He reloaded. "Let M." She stared at him like she didn't know him anymore. "You think you can shoot your way out of this land? Out of what you've done?" His jaw clenched. "I don't think. I survive." The words hung there, sharp as barbed wire. Then she turned her horse into the river. "Then survive this," she said, and rode hard through the current. Eli followed. The horses fought the pull of the water, but they made it across, soaked and shaking. On the far side, they climbed toward the bluff. The path narrowed to a ledge no wider than a wagon board, the wind shrieking through the canyons below. Halfway up, Nora's horse slipped, stones tumbling into the ravine. She yanked the reins and steadied it, but her face was pale. Eli reached for her, and for a moment their hands met, rough, desperate, alive. When they finally reached the top, the land opened wide before them. Golden plains stretching to the horizon, framed by the dark line of mountains. The wind smelled of sage and ash. Carson's Bluff, his father's land, his last chance at redemption. Nora slid from the saddle, staring at the burned remains of a homestead that once stood proud. "This is what you came back for?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. He walked to the fence post half buried in weeds and brushed off the dust. The brand was still there, Carson, cut deep, almost defiant. I built this place once, he murmured. With my father. Before the war. Before you became what you are now, she said. He looked at her then, really looked. You think I don't know what I've done? Every man I shot, every lie I told, it's all right here. He thumped his chest. And it doesn't go away, Nora. She stepped closer, eyes glistening. Then stop fighting ghosts, Eli. You're still breathing. That means you get to choose. Before he could answer, the distant thunder of hooves rolled across the plain. He turned toward the sound. 6 riders this time, Russell's men, sure as death. Dust rose behind them like smoke from a burning past. Eli drew his gun. Get behind the wagon. No, she said. I'm done hiding. He almost smiled. Then stay close. The first bullet screamed past, grazing his arm. He fired back, hitting one rider square. Another came fast, a blur of fury and dust. Eli dropped him with a second shot. The air filled with gunfire, the roar of hooves, the shouts of dying men. It was chaos, hot, deafening, final. Nora grabbed a fallen rifle and joined him, her hands steady despite the tears streaking her cheeks. When the last man fell, the plains went still again. The only sound was the wind moving through the grass, whispering secrets the dead would never hear. Eli staggered, blood seeping through his sleeve. Nora rushed to him, pressing her scarf to the wound. You're hit. He shook his head weakly. I've been hit before, but this time's different. He looked past her to the horizon, where the sun was beginning to fall. Yeah, he said quietly. It is. They sat there as the light turned amber and long shadows crawled across the bluff. The war inside him, the one he'd fought for years, was finally losing ground. Nora broke the silence. What happens now? He smiled faintly. Now we rebuild. Or we leave. Maybe both. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And the fighting? He glanced at the revolver, lying in the dust. No more fighting. Then, almost to himself, he added, I fought every battle but the one that mattered. The sun sank lower, turning the world gold and crimson. The wind carried the smell of rain, distant and clean. For the first time, Eli felt something close to peace, not because he'd won, but because he'd stopped running. Far below, the river shimmered like a silver scar across the land. Tomorrow they'd ride again, maybe east, maybe nowhere at all. But tonight the frontier was quiet, and the ghosts were finally still. He looked at Nora at the strength in her eyes and said softly, Guess you won after all. She smiled through the dusk. No, Eli, you did. And as the night closed around them, the west, wild, unforgiving, eternal, seemed to breathe again, carrying with it the truth he bled to learn. Some battles aren't fought with bullets, but with the heart that refuses to surrender. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.